When you're sad, you don't act like yourself. You gotta think of everything while you're writing it. Gotta keep the right punctuation. Gotta make sure capital letters. Gotta use phonics. Difficult. I've written to 200 people. I'm trying to communicate with them so you can pass my letter on to the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. If we don't have communication, then we can't share our ideas. When everybody comes together, they share their ideas and make it fun and happy.
My name's Pattison. I'm the Literacy Lead for the Priority Literacy Project. Thank you for engaging in these podcasts. I hope you find them really useful in terms of helping you in your roles and making a difference for the young people you work with. In terms of priority literacy, one of the key people we work with is a literacy lead. They might not be sort of called a literacy lead, it might be part of what their role is, but within a primary school and a secondary school, they're sort of like the gatekeepers really. They're the key person that's driving this across the school. So all of the things that I talk about in the various podcasts, this person is the one that is really sort of championing it. So sometimes they're called a literacy lead, or we refer to them as a literacy champion. Essentially, they're the ones that are supporting staff to make it happen. So in this podcast, we're going to talk about our experiences of that and how we supported them, but also some of the challenges and why they often happen. And that's based on experience, really. So I'm lucky enough to work with lots of schools in this project and beyond it, really. So it's sort of, let's come and bring those messages of what we see and what we think, bring some experts in as well and what they think. And then the exciting bit is sort of offer some suggestions on how we can get it right and deal with some of the challenges. And then that really sort of impactful bit is when we get it right, the sort of excellent bits that we start to see as leaders, with the people that we're working with and ultimately the young people we're working with. So yes, and I guess when I sort of put this together and did some more thinking on it, some of these messages are really useful for leaders in general. So obviously we're really focusing on the literacy, but I think a lot of these messages can be sort of taken across any subject really, and probably useful content, useful knowledge for people outside of schools as well to understand that actually the sort of leadership of staff and making change in classes can be quite a challenge. Lots of parts to that. So understanding maybe how schools operate and really do sort of make a difference for their children, because that's what we're here for, really. So yeah, it's an interesting podcast. It was one I was really keen to get in, because it's such a difficult topic, but one that's vital, really, because it's no good in a school of 8 teachers if 3 are doing a great job. We need it where everybody's doing a great job, so that if the young people move through that system, they get a great deal every day. If we get a great deal every day, that builds up and obviously builds to something great at the end of the journey. So yeah, looking forward to this one. Okay, so leading literacy is a wonderful opportunity, I see, but it could also be really daunting. Let's backtrack a little bit. Let's understand what we mean by literacy. We can have a narrow view of literacy as just reading and writing, but I like sort of a wider understanding of literacy. It's making sense of the world and communicating with the world. So I'll explain what I mean. Making sense of the world, we read material, so therefore reading helps us make sense of the world. But also we listen, we take on board what we're hearing, maybe in the media or on our computer or on our phones or the people that we're talking with. So that helps you make sense of the world. But then we want to put our stamp on the world as well. And that's where the writing and the speaking comes in. So if we think of literacy as that, really, making sense of the world and communicating with the world, that sort of gives this role that the sort of priority and the oomph that it actually needs, because what a responsibility. Great guidance out there, lots of material and training, but the challenge is many of the people with the responsibility of leading literacy are often teaching. They might have other roles. So if we take a primary setting, the leading of literacy might actually be with what, let's say, an English leader. The English leader has got many parts to lead, and they've probably got their own class as well. Positives, well, they're what I call an authentic example. They're in the class, living, breathing it, trialing it, working with the young people, seeing the problems, interacting with families. But one of the problems there is time. So they're so sort of consumed with the rigor of the job, and being able to get out there and lead is a real challenge. Across secondaries, I think it gets even harder. If a secondary hasn't allocated a literacy lead, it might fall with someone in the senior leadership team. It might fall with a department lead. So again, they're going to have multiple jobs to do, but literacy is so crucial that they need to be able to get out there and lead it well. So time is I guess is the big factor really. Having the time to lead this is essential. But what can happen is I find that literacy leaders often show like a shining light for literacy. They love it. There's a passion for it. There's a knowledge base for it, and so they often sort of identified as the next lead. And here they are, they're leading. But one of the challenges is that being able to lead adults is pretty tricky. I can remember at the end of my first year of teaching, I was given a leadership responsibility, and I couldn't wait to get into it. And then the reality hit of how difficult it is compared to teaching a class of children. And I guess the two main challenges and issues I see around leadership, leading literacy, are this idea that it's more simpler than it is. So, for example, we're expecting consistent use of a certain approach, maybe for writing or reading. So we train up the staff, or we give them some guidance, and away they go, and the world will be rosy, and it's all used really well. That rarely happens. And the second thing, and I guess this has really shone through the prior to literacy, is in school we call it monitoring, which is essentially checking how well are things going. And as a leader, if we haven't got our finger on the pulse in terms of how well things are going, we can't then react to that, and we haven't got that inaccurate picture. So in summary, really, I think the three key challenges for me are time, for various reasons. And it's this idea of thinking that change and implementation is more simpler than it actually is. And then that third point about not really getting out there and completing monitoring activities and really getting to the heart of how well things are going. I think if we're going to assist adults to sort of move forward with an idea and buy into that change, at the heart of it, the literacy leader themselves needs to understand about leadership. They need to understand the latest guidance, they need to interact with research, they need to go on training. And one bit of my advice that I often offer is that, so in terms of their literacy knowledge and this idea of having a passion for literacy, great, 10 out of 10. But the leading of adults, in my opinion, they need to be coached and mentored by a senior leader in school. So the senior leader themselves might not be an expert in literacy, but they've certainly got the experiences and knowledge to be able to support them as a leader. Because leading those adults, in terms of, I keep saying it's difficult. There are many stages to that, and I know when we talk to our expert in this field, she'll talk through some of those, and you'll understand the complexities really. Because what we know is that for let's say we're working with adults, there's a whole range of experience, a whole range of knowledges. You get quite a range of beliefs about how things should be done. And then you've got the interesting bit about their own life, really, and their own journey of literacy as well. So you've got loads of variables when you're trying to work with adults to get them to where you want them to be. So you need to understand all that. You need to prepare them for it. And I think some people miss that stage, really. And what I mean by that is, let's say in school, there's a certain bit of writing that we could definitely do better. So we're going to do this new approach. We can't launch straight into that approach because we're going to get some problems. We're going to get anxiety. We're going to get, wait a minute, what was wrong with how we used to do it? We might have a lack of knowledge. So then we're going to have some issues around there. That can be quite a challenge. So in schools, if we try to do something and don't have every sort of enough knowledge, should I say, then it's going to be implemented badly and maybe not how we intended it. So they're just some of the sort of challenges that are faced with leadership, really. Many of them can happen in a classroom when we're working with children, but I just think, again, from my own experience, working with various schools, it's a complex matter. So therefore, the more skilled up we are as leaders in terms of our knowledge base, we're going to get better with our experience. But I think we can fast track some of that if we work alongside a coach or a mentor, maybe in school or externally. So throughout the Prior to Literacy project, we were aware of some of these challenges in terms of leading literacy in various settings. So we put it at the heart of what we did. So we had this wonderful professional development offer in terms of activities around reading and transition and writing. But what we wanted is that the schools received a visit from a specialist. So when we constructed those days and what those days look like, working alongside the leaders to be able to carry out various activities, it was at the heart of it. But I guess the main aim was to be able to carry out these activities, show them how to do these activities on how we lead change, how we monitor it, and then eventually move away so they could do it for themselves. So if I give you an example, one of the activities that we put in is something called book study, which was fabulous, really. So the school would tell us we've worked on this and we think we're here. So let's check that out. And we would have a group of students or pupils out, and they would come with their books. And that was a bit of a safety net for them. So what we did, or the literacy specialist did initially, is to run that book study. So the children are all sat there, or the young people are sat there, and we'd say to them, right, find a piece of work that you're really proud of. So we sort of set in the scene, and they'd flick through the books, and then they'd tell us about pieces of work that they're proud of, and they get used to how this is going to go. And then we would ask various questions of the children while the leaders would sit alongside us, so they could see how their children was responding, what they were showing. And that was fascinating for them, because what it compared is their understanding of where they're at with what the kids said, and how close were they. And as the visits went on through prior to literacy, we would then support them to generate the questions, and then they would lead the activity. And I know I've just recently completed a final visit of one of my schools. We talked about this book study, how we're going to use it. They got some really useful questions, and I then sat back, and then my role was to then talk about what did they see and coach them through that. So what we did through prior to literacy is, yes, drive literacy, yes, talk about how important it is, but we wanted to work alongside leaders to help them understand this wonderful subject and how to lead it well. So one of the key differences from just being a teacher into the becoming a leader, I'm going to go back to many years ago when I experienced that. I think teaching children is complex, but not as complex as working with adults. I can remember I actually led maths after my first year of teaching, and I can remember having a really good idea of what goes in my classroom, because I knew it inside out, but I had very limited understanding of how the other teachers were working. So actually, I'm coming from a really a negative place. So when I sit with them at staff meeting, I've got a very limited understanding of where they're coming from, how they do certain things, their own knowledge base, their own confidence. Whereas in my class, I know my children really, really well. I've had those discussions with parents. I've worked with them for a long time. So I think we know our children far better than maybe we know our team. That's my first one. But that in itself is a challenge, because our team have got all different levels of experience. They've been teaching for various amounts as well. So understanding the difference and how to get the best from people, I found that really, really difficult at the start. And the second bit is relationships. In the class, you form really strong relationships with the children to get the best out of them. And then with your teaching colleagues or the teaching assistants, or I was really keen to build relationships with anyone who worked in a school. With friends, with support, we talk about the weekend. That then shifts when you can become a leader. And I really felt that as a head teacher, really. You have these strong relationships with people, but then to lead them is different, because you're now persuading them to change behaviours, do something new, and then that really difficult bit of holding them to account. There was something that we were meant to do. And that brings a different challenge around relationships. And the bit that I mentioned earlier, I guess the third bit is, well, through training, we know how children learn and how to get the best out of them. But through our training, we never learn how to get the best out of adults. So then that becomes a whole new module of learning, in my opinion, really. So some people will train for 3 years, 4 years to become a teacher. Are they getting 3 years, 4 years of leadership training before they're then dropped into a leadership role? I doubt it, really. And that's why I'm an advocate for helping speed up that learning journey with a coach or a mentor, training, research. That's probably my top 3 bits of learning, really. The biggest challenge I've ever faced was my time stepping into headship. So I talked earlier about not knowing the staff. I went into a school not knowing the school very well. I was an outsider coming to this school. I can remember the school had never had a good rating in any area. I don't like this term, but I'm going to say it, that many of the staff were on their knees, working really, really hard. The outcomes weren't great. Ofsted were telling them that they weren't great. And all of a sudden, I'm now the head teacher of that place. So taking people from low starting points, taking them from not having success was a real challenge. Really, it's a big drain on you emotionally because you live and breathe it. But also some of the challenges we face are really complex, and helping people deal with that it's very time consuming, and you mess up. There are some decisions you make that don't work, and I think when you do that's really hard as well. But I think if you make more good decisions than bad decisions, you're going to get some success, and I know that worked out really well for me. So I think going on that journey myself puts me in a strong place when I work with schools, because I would say I'm a rare breed, but something that makes me quite unique is that, yes, I've got this literacy expertise, but I've been on a journey in terms of being a leader. I've been a deputy head in a challenging school, and then I've had time as a head teacher and an executive. So I've lived and breathed that leadership experience, which, like I said, is so crucial. I guess that's the number one, really. And then have that number one goal. So in this podcast, we're really thinking about literacy leadership. So what's your number one goal? You might have been given that role, you might have applied for that role, but there's got to be a core purpose to what you are doing. So when the difficult bits come along, you go back to your core purpose of why you're in that wonderful position. Okay, so I've sort of dissected some of the challenges and how we, as a project, have supported leaders in terms of that. I think it's really important to hear from an expert in this field to really understand some of the latest thinking and research around implementation and leading adults. So I'm going to pass you over to Amy Ford now. Amy Ford works at the Derby Research School, so she's great for supporting this topic.
My name is Amy Ford, and I am Director of Derby Research School, and I'm also Director for MPQ's Leadership and CPD at Spencer Teaching School Hub, and I'm also the lead for Priority Literacy. So in terms of implementation is if we have an intervention or a process that we want to put in place, it's how we do it and how we do it in a structured way to have the best impact. So previously, from the Education Endowment Foundation, we created some guidance for school leaders on how to break down that process. So Carl mentioned that sometimes you get put into a leadership role, you don't have the experience, you've not necessarily had the training on how to do implementation well, you've maybe been part of the process, so you know what you do like, what you don't like, but how do you do it professionally and effectively? So we did some guidance that was around the process. So how do you break it down? The process started with the explore phase. So this is really thinking about, what do you need to do? What is your problem in your school or your setting? And that can be in any scenario. It doesn't just have to be in education. So it's thinking about, well, what are our needs? I don't want to find a solution for a problem that I don't have. I really need to dig a little bit deeper. Try and think of it as working like a scientist, not a lawyer. So what I mean by that is when you're looking at your data, you're looking at the information in front of you, maybe think about it as a hypothesis. So is this true? To what extent is this true? Rather than as a lawyer, this is what I think, I'm going to find all the evidence to back it up regardless of what everybody else says. So the explore phase is very much about what's the root causes of our problems and getting underneath the bonnet and really trying to find out what that is to start off well. And then it's also about thinking about the implementation, the intervention that we want to put in. Is it the right thing? Does it meet our need? And then is it feasible for our setting? Because everybody works very different settings, primary, secondary, post-16, rural, urban schools. We've all got different staff bodies, capacity, training needs. How do we put the correct procedure in place for our school and make it work the best? So that's the first stage of explore. Sometimes in education, we jump from the explore to getting on with it and just doing it because we feel that accountability. We've just got to get on. We've got to prove we're doing something. Actually, we need to put the brakes on, come back to, is this fitting a need for our school? If it isn't, it's a little bit pointless. So the explore phase is really important. The next part of the process is prepare. So how do you prepare your staff to get on board to do this really well? And that comes back to what Carl mentioned about effective professional development. Are you getting the team on board? Are they understanding where you're going, what the vision is? Are they also able to share in that? Have they had the training to do it well? Because if they haven't, there's going to be massive frustration and it's not going to go well. The next part of the process is deliver. So that's us delivering the intervention. I say sometimes we forget in the deliver, we just say, this is what we're doing, off you go. we hope for the best and then come back to it. And maybe there's been some problems along the way and we start questioning, well, why has that happened? Actually, we need to think about delivery as a process. So we deliver the intervention, but we've got to monitor it all the way through to check that we are, A, doing it well, staff feel confident that they've got training needs, and if partway through delivery there's some barriers, we need to find the enablers. We need to then work out how do we make this a little bit smoother. And then finally, part of that process is the sustain stage, and I'd say in education we miss that bit off because we get really excited about finding the problem, getting the team on board, delivering it, but then we don't sustain it. We feel that it would just almost have that momentum itself, and then we start on the next new best thing. What's the next problem? What do we need to do? And then ultimately that intervention just dies off because we're not keeping it in the air, we're not keeping that balloon in the air, that momentum. And we sort of get these ghost initiatives walking the corridors where they're half-baked or they're not really carrying on anymore. Some people are holding on to it rigidly, others not so. There's a new thing coming in, so it doesn't really feel effective. So part of the process is very much around how do we break down implementation to make it have the best impact possible. So that's our process, and that was our previous guidance. But as we know, people are very complex, behaviour change is very complex, and actually that needs to be at the centre of this. So our initial guidance around the process is how you do implementation. We've now done a new iteration of the guidance report, which is about how you do it well. So how we do it well is very much about behaviours of our staff and also our contextual settings. So if I talk a little bit about the behaviours, we have 3 behaviours that we feel if staff embody that, then they're going to have the best impact in moving this process forward. So the first one is engage. So engage is about how do you bring everybody on board? How do you get everybody involved in the process to feel like they're not being done to, they are doing it with you. There's a phrase that goes around a lot at the moment about in education, you're either on the bus or you're off the bus, and we talk about buy-in. One of my colleagues, Phil, from Greenshaw Research School, talked about, is it buy-in or is it being in? Because he raised a really important point that when you say buy-in, it means you're either agreeing with a leader or you're in disagreement, and that's polar opposite. When actually, as a leader, are we saying that you're driving that bus, you're aware of absolutely everything in front of you, you've got no blind spots whatsoever, you're just going to drive that initiative forward without taking on board anybody else because you know best? Actually, implementation is a collaborative process. We need to make sure that we are talking to other people, different stakeholders, parents, governors, teachers, pupils, because we don't know everything. And actually, we really need to have that as a collaborative process. So when you talk about buy-in, actually, is it about being in? It's about people sharing your vision, sharing that motivation, sharing the direction, but they can feedback. They can input to change that where necessary so that actually the process gets better. So I really liked that as an idea, particularly if we talk about an example in schools, teaching assistants. If we're wanting to offer training for teaching assistants, you can't just have your leader saying what they think they should do. You need the voice of your teaching assistant. You need the voice of the children. You need the voice of governors, policy. Everybody needs to get in on that. So that complexity is really key. So when we talk about engage, what we want to do is engage people that your voice is heard, that you are able to share where we're going on this journey. Your input's incredibly important to get that clarity. Because in research, we have the Johari window, which talks about your open self. You know everything about you. You've got your blind self, which is things that everybody else notices about you, but you have no clue about. And you'll keep doing those behaviours, you'll keep doing those mechanisms, unless somebody says, hang on a minute, do you know that you do this, this and this? We could do it a very different way. So that blind spot is incredibly important. And I think collaboration and communication with your team for the engage. And that's that cross-setting behaviour. So if you think about the explore stage when we talked about, is this a problem? And who is it a problem for? Because I'm only going to know it's a problem for me and my little environment and my experience, but actually I need somebody else to come in and say, no, what you've missed is this. Can we look at it as a much bigger picture? So that's really interesting. We then have unite. So uniting the behaviours is about getting everybody to understand why, not just, I want you to do this. It's, well, why am I doing that? We come back to behaviour. Change habits are really difficult to break. Like Carl said, we feel like we've got our own experience, I know what I'm doing, it feels right to me, it fits my beliefs. Somebody else comes in with a different vision, a different belief. I need to understand that to be a part of it. So the Unite is very much getting everyone to align with the vision, being more practical about it. So yes, we've engaged everyone, everyone's had their voice, but now how do we align together to make sure we're all moving forward and taking account that everybody plays a key role? And then the final one is reflect. We can't just keep going with something. We have to have pause points to think about, is this right? Do we need to tweak it? Do we need to change it? And having those reflective points are incredibly important as we move forward. So they are the behaviours at the heart of it. And I think the next part of the process that we maybe necessarily didn't make explicit in the guidance before is the contextual factors. We can't decouple the process of implementation of how we do it with what we do. So it does need to be an evidence-informed approach. In our priority literacy project, we've been into settings where schools have maybe not got the right intervention. It's not evidence-informed, it's not got the biggest lever for change and impact. And they're probably doing the implementation as well as they can, but actually the intervention is wrong. So it is about what you do and how you do it. Yes, so when you talk about what you do, that's going to be an approach. So if we talked about what you do in terms of, let's say, vocabulary. Now, what you do, the evidence base says when you're doing vocabulary and you're trying to learn new language, you have to break it down. You have to select the right word. First of all, it's got to be a word worth teaching. You've got to explain it in student-friendly terms so that you can understand it, not from a dictionary. You've then got to explore it and break it down in terms of the etymology. Where did that word come from? The morphology. What are the parts of the word that bring it together to help me to understand? And then consolidate. So you've got to use it repeatedly. You've got to have it in your speech. It can't be a list of words. It can't be on a wall. It can't just be referred to once. We've got research evidence that suggests you have to hear and use a word 17 times for it to go into your long-term memory. So that is what you would do. Sometimes we've gone into schools where vocabulary acquisition has predominantly focused on, here's a word, here's what it means, write it in your book, write it in a sentence. It's not come back to, it's not broken down. So if you've got a word that's transpiration, for example, and the teacher hasn't broken it down to say, this is what trans means. So when transport comes up or another word with a similar root word, children haven't got the skills to break it down because they've not had that effective instruction. So that's about what you do, which is why we have to make evidence-informed decisions, and then we have to act on those evidence-informed approaches. So then if we've got the intervention right, so it's evidence-informed, then it comes to how well we implement that. So if you've got staff who have always done, here's a word, find it in a dictionary, put it into a sentence, we want to shift that behaviour. We want them to start breaking it down. We want them to start bringing it into their planning. We want them to get children talking about it. That's when we come to the process of implementation. So we really need to think about that prepare stage. How do we prepare our teachers, give them the correct professional development, make sure they've got time to rehearse it. We need to make sure as leaders that we're monitoring that for fidelity is what we call it. Are they doing the process as we need them to, following the core components so they're not going off on a little bit of a tangent. It's like on Bake Off when they say, let's all make, a Battenberg. And then you've got people who are, I'm Maverick, I'm not going to do it with the same colours, I'm going to do circles. It's a little bit more palatable to me to do it in that way. No, we need fidelity. We're not then doing a Battenberg, are we? We're doing something completely different. So it comes back to, let's really support you to do what we need for fidelity and monitor it. And then it comes back to those cross-cutting behaviours, engage, unite, reflect. How do I engage people to get them on board with what we're doing? And then unite, how do I make sure your belief system, your behaviours, your approach aligns with mine and you get the why, because that will help us trigger the actual behaviours that I want to see. So it's having both together, because what we need to have is the right intervention, but then also the process of implementation, and then also really focusing on those behaviours to drive change to make sure we do it well. When I was teaching, I'd say necessarily I wasn't into the research or the evidence base. So at that time, there wasn't that shift towards it as there is now. And I think my first step into that was when I was a deputy head teacher of a school for deaf children. And I was an English teacher, and at that time when I joined the school, there was a lot of research that said deaf children can't read. Deaf children won't be able to write grammatically correct sentences because of this wealth of research, and that's always going to be limited. And I thought, is that true though? Because yes, we've got this research, yes, we've got this evidence, but does it sit in a classroom environment? Have we done this practically? Have we heard from the children themselves about what they find useful rather than what we as academics find useful? So then I did my master's, and I did it in cognition and learning, and I focused on writing, and I wanted to work with a group of deaf students to create a shape coding, because British Sign Language is a visual language. There's no written form to it. So determiners and, words like the and a and plural, they just don't exist. So it's really hard for them to write that down. So we created collaboratively a shape coding system where the students said, wouldn't it be great if we had this shape because, wouldn't it be great because X, Y, and Z? And actually, we collaborated on this sentence shape coding that built on previous iterations of other academics that had done fantastic work. We ran the project over a year and a half. And then what we found was that students who hadn't been able to access GCSEs, they'd been on entry-level qualifications, they accessed GCSEs, they got those grades. We got students who had other comorbidities such as autism and other aspects to their deafness. They then had the ability to start writing sentences to get a communication iPad to then go out and be more independent. So actually that's when I thought collaboration, coming back to those cross-cutting behaviours about engaging with your stakeholders and hearing from them and having the research and doing it well is really useful. So after that, I started looking more into how do we change practice and pedagogy and curriculum, and how do we get staff on board to do this, because the impact, it's not about data, it's about those life chances for those young people. They got to be more independent, they got access to qualifications and routes they wouldn't necessarily have had before. So I think I then changed roles, different schools, different settings, found the research school, really loved what they were doing, and that spoke to me massively because our ethos at the EEF is very much about giving disadvantaged children the opportunity. Now, I'm from a disadvantaged family. I would have been your free school meals child, and it's about how do we give opportunities for everybody and get that equity of education. And I feel like the equity of education comes from knowledge, collaboration, communication, and striving to do better. Not because we're not good enough, but because we can always be better. So that's how I got into the research school. And literacy is my passion. And through that, I've just then started working with lots of different practitioners, different companies, different networks. And through that, I've met Carl. And then we collaborated on this DFE project as a consortium to share all of our expertise, because there are a lot of players in the system. And I think when we work together and we build on each other's strengths and develop each other's areas for development, we can make some great traction. So that's how we came to focus on this project. So then Carl's got primary experience, mine's from all through. So when I was deputy head, it was an all through school, and I retrained from primary to post 16. Predominantly before that it was secondary. So actually we complement each other so much better. Carl's great on the early years and the primary aspect, and then I've got more of that secondary, and we both have experience in both fields really to cross over to make sure we've got that connectivity. Because there's always going to be bias. So any collection of data and any context are going to have bias, and if you're not aware of them, it can skew your view completely. Similarly, if you're trying to collect responses from people, you could ask leading questions unknowingly to get the response you want. You can just focus on one train of thought, which derails the whole focus of what you're trying to achieve. So I think it's just about making sure that you're aware of the potential biases, like confirmation bias. You don't want an echo chamber. You don't want to hear back what you think and what you feel, because you're going to miss huge aspects where there could be development and change. So I feel like that's a crucial point of that assessing need, assessing your situation and assessing feasibility, and also that self-reflection. You've got to be very critical about yourself, your own awareness and your own blind spots. So when we partnered together to do the Priority Literacy project, we were also really aware of what are the needs, first of all, across Derby and Nottingham City, because we had to create the offer and we needed to create an offer that matched needs. So I'd say what we got from schools, from our surveys, from data, bringing everything together, was that we've got leaders in schools that are incredibly passionate about literacy. They want to drive that forward, but potentially the connectivity in a school, that align in a vision, everybody being on board, coming back to the behaviours of a whole team approaching literacy, because that underpins absolutely everything, potentially wasn't there. I'd say we also had a lot of leaders who are new to role. Sometimes literacy lead always gets passed on to somebody who is an English teacher or has English as their specialism. And sometimes, particularly for secondary, that's not always the most effective. Actually having someone from another subject discipline really helps to focus on literacy across subject disciplines. It's not getting pigeonholed into just being an English thing. It's an everyone thing. We're all responsible. We're all teachers of literacy. And having someone drive that, but then get people on board at the same time, make sure that's in school improvement plans, make sure that's a high priority. So I think for us, literacy was there, you've got pockets of passion, but we hadn't got that at the high level. Let's think about how do we raise the profile of literacy, how do we drive it? And I talked about how do we keep a priority in the air, keep that buoyant. This was also a way to combat that, I think. So I feel that now we've done the priority literacy project, we've raised the profile of literacy, we've shared lots of different opportunities for professional development that maybe schools wouldn't have been able to afford with current staffing, budgets, etc. So there's been an opportunity of external CPD that helps, that might not necessarily have been there, and having that literacy specialist to come in and help the school navigate how to align everybody. So it's probably everyone's engaged, we know the purpose, we know it's important, but there might have been some miscommunication or distortion of approach on how do we get clarity and drive this forward. I think the biggest challenge in this project is making sure we've got the understanding, the nuances of every school and every context, because as much as we've got a fantastic CPD offer, I don't think that needs shoehorning into every single school. It has to match their needs, where they are in the process. Having a large group of literacy specialists and working with literacy specialists to really prioritise what a school needs, and being brave enough to say to the school and to the leaders, yes, we've got all of this suite of things to do. It's not a supermarket sweep. We're not just going to scoop it all because we need it. Actually, what's going to be pertinent? What's going to drive this forward? And sometimes you get that, I don't want to miss out on anything. I need all of these things right now. And that's not. If we've got lots of priorities, we have no priorities. So really focusing on what is it that's going to drive this forward for you and what's feasible. Think about your staff, think about your infrastructure, think about your capacity to lead this very, very well. Doing one thing well is going to be better than doing everything. So I think for us was navigating that with schools to, it's great, it's like being in a sweet shop, all these things we've ever wanted and it's free, brilliant. What do we need though? What is it that you definitely need? What's your need? What's your purpose? What's your direction? And I'd say the challenge is navigating that and ensuring that you are sharing with schools. This is our starting point, but we can always develop there and then we can give you those resources later. But focus on what's prevalent right now in front of us. I think if I went back, would I want to be a teacher? I'd say there was a turning point for me when I did want to do teaching. I never wanted to be a teacher. I shouldn't be admitting that. I wanted to be a journalist and a writer. And that's how I started off. And I did that, which was great. And I did publishing. I worked for a newspaper. I did a lot of things around that and loved it. And then I was also working part-time at university as a support worker for 10 deaf-blind adults. And there was a man in his 60s and he just scribbled on paper. That's all he did, every day, all day. And I read some of his notes and he used to communicate, he used to fingerspell, he used to sign to people, and that just stopped when his mum passed away. And he hadn't really connected with people in the occupational kind of health centre to get that moving forward. And I just thought it was a really sad approach that he was just scribbling every day and that maybe there could be a way to communicate. So I got a game of Scrabble out one day and I'd been practicing over time, and you get defeated, like, oh, this isn't going anywhere. And we got a Scrabble board out, and there was a picture of a goose. So I started getting the letter G, and I moved it over, and then I got the O, and I was signing it and moved it over. And then just really secretly under the table, he just finger spelled goose to me. And I was like, wow, that's the first time this person has spoken in 30 years. Like, this is great. So I worked with him, and we got to a point where he was communicating, he was talking, he was building his confidence. And then I left university and went and did something else. I came back to visit, and he was back to scribbling. And you just think, great, you had that input, you had that opportunity, it wasn't sustained. There wasn't a succession plan of somebody coming in and supporting that. And then for me, I just thought, in education, you get those fantastic teachers that want to drive and push, and you get motivated and you get that spark. But then if that's not kept up, what happens to our young people? And who cares that much about our young people to get them to where they need to be? And I think that's when I thought, maybe I need to go into education, because I've got that spark, I've got that commitment, and I think I can put that passion into other people to drive it. And I think if I hadn't have gone into teaching, great writing stories, but actually I'm writing people's stories for them in their real life. And I'll meet students now. I was in hospital with my daughter not that long ago, and a student was working as a healthcare assistant, and she came up and she's like, Miss Ford. I was like, hi, how are you? And she said, if it hadn't been for you, I wouldn't be where I am now. You were the only person that took the time out to support me. You understood me. She said, I got diagnosed with ADHD, autism. She said, I didn't have that diagnosis at the time, but you took the time to really focus. You supported me. You were my advocate for all of those other teachers to get on board and support. She said, when you left, I struggled, but I just kept thinking about what those behaviours were that you'd instilled in me, and this is where I am today. And she said, I just want to thank you. And it's just moments like that. So I think you think you're not doing anything and you're just part of the process and going through, but it's just those moments when you get that realisation that you do impact on a lot of people's lives. And I think for us as leaders of literacy and just teachers in general, we might be a drop in the ocean that we feel, but actually that's huge waves and ripples that we're causing for our young people. So I don't think I would change and not be a teacher now. Communication is absolutely key. It's the centre of everything. I know Carl talked previously about that monitoring. So when we're delivering an intervention and we're trying to monitor and see how well it's going, if we haven't communicated to our team and our staff why we're doing the monitoring, it becomes a sense of accountability. And actually people feel stressed and don't want to do it, or they feel like they're not good enough. Whereas if we're creating a communicative approach of, we're doing this because we can always get better, we're doing this developmentally, this is what this is going to look like, here are our outcomes, and we do it together, that's more important. We sometimes see leaders who create an implementation plan on their own and then just do it to the staff, and then they monitor and they're ticking a box. But implementation is about collaboration. So if we're just doing it on our own, independently, without talking and communicating, yeah, we're hitting the mark of making sure that we've done all of the processes and monitoring, but we're missing the point, because actually it comes back to everybody needs to feel understood, listened to, align with the vision to get that why. If you haven't got the communication, that's where it's all going to fall down. In terms of communication, I always over-communicate, and I never assume that there's an expected amount of knowledge. And I think if that happens, or sometimes I forget, you get the expert novice scenario where sometimes I feel like, as an expert, I've been doing this a long time, maybe I communicate at a level that's not supportive of people who are novice and on the journey. And I think I need to be reflective of coming back to really focusing on the steps of how do you get to where you want to be, thinking at it from a point of view of a novice in a certain area rather than an expert, because I don't want to miss any aspects of that. And I try to come back to, if you're doing a recipe and it always says mix to a good consistency, I've never made souffle. I don't know what a good consistency is. I need that extra step, that extra explanation. And I feel like that's something just to bear in mind, that always come back to over communicating. And it's not seen as, oh, I'm trying to patronise. Actually, I'm just trying to ensure that we're on the same page, and I don't want to assume anything at any point. So I'd say that probably is one focus for me. If you want to know any more information on literacy or you want to work on implementation and leadership, you can find me at Derby Research School.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of topics in this podcast so far, but here's the sort of finale really. What happens when we get it right? Well, actually, when we get it right, we're going to have an impact on outcomes. What I mean by that, the young people we work with are going to do better. Okay, if we compare year on year, what they're doing this year will be better than last year and will continue to grow in whatever field. But then, particularly in their reading, we're going to see them understanding far more of their reading. And here's the key bit, we're going to see our young people wanting to read and seeing that there's a purpose to it. For writing, we're going to see better writing outcomes. We're going to see more children hitting what we call age-related. Basically, at whatever age and stage they are, they can produce those standards and maybe excel beyond it. And from a writing sense, they see that writing has meaning and can move forward. They're confident at talking, confident understanding the world around them. So that's the number one goal of getting this right. The second goal is the team feel it and really sort of feel the benefits of it, I guess. What I mean by that is they will see that they've gone through this difficult journey or they've implemented what you've asked them to say and they see that it works. I think from my own journey as a literacy advisor, that's probably one of the most rewarding bits at the minute. When people go with an idea and they start to use it and they see the impact for themselves, and that's where the two bits come together. When the team start to see the impact of it, they feel great. They know that they've taken something from how it used to be to something that's better, and there's that sort of togetherness as well. And let's finish off with the leader themselves. Sometimes you might not get the recognition, but your core purpose, what's driving, you know that you've made a step towards making that better. So what we get is that inner understanding that I've made a positive difference, really. So it's the young people we work with, it's the teams we work with, and then it's ourselves as well. This is really it's such a rewarding role, and to be able to get that feedback, to get that sense of I've helped make this better, it's really that's, I guess, is it number one? I don't know, I think it's different for all of us, but it's certainly one of the things that I see when we get it right. Okay, so if you'd like further guidance on this topic around leading literacy, then please do reach out to the Literacy Excellence Centre, and the details will be on the screen now in terms of the website and how to engage with that, and the various social media channels as well, so interact with us to start that journey. I would recommend, if you're in the East Midlands area, to reach out to the Derby Research School. Some of their CPD, the Professional Development for Leaders, is excellent. And I know if you're not in the East Midlands region, find out your local research school as well. There's some wonderful material. And finally, please engage with those training opportunities that are around there, like MPQ, the MPQ for Leading Literacy. It's a wonderful course. I'm looking to facilitate on it as well. That's something that I certainly think you should invest in, really. Invest in yourself so you feel really confident. As well as engaging in the Priority Literacy Project or the Literacy Excellence Centre, please do reach out to myself. I work as an independent advisor as well. You can find more details about my work at pattison.co.uk. I'd love to engage with you and support you in whatever journey you are on.